Who do you think can take away your sense of belonging? A stranger? A rival? No. The greatest betrayal comes from the people who were supposed to protect you, your own family. What happens when the stepmother who spent years trying to erase you from your own home suddenly finds herself the one being pushed out? Welcome to AGS Stories, where true stories of betrayal, resilience, and justice come to life. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel, and let's dive into today's emotional and dramatic story. My stepmom spent years trying to get rid of me. She made my life a living hell, convinced my dad to push me aside, and acted like I didn't belong. But in the end, she was the one who got kicked out. I never imagined things would turn out that way. For years, I was the one fighting just to have a place in my own home, the one who felt like an outsider in my own family. I spent so long trying to hold on to the one person who was supposed to protect me, my dad, but I didn't realize that sometimes the people you trust the most are the ones who let you down the hardest. And in the end, it wasn't me who had to leave. It was her. But before I tell you how that happened, let me start from the beginning. It was always just me and my dad growing up. My mom passed away when I was really young, too young to have any real memories of her, but my dad did his best to fill in the gaps. He worked hard, sometimes too hard, but he always made time for me. He was my hero, my whole world, and for a long time, I believed I was his too. Then Karen came along. My dad met her when I was 14. At first, I was happy for him. He had spent so many years alone, just focused on work and taking care of me, and I thought maybe this was his chance to be happy again. And honestly, I wanted it to work. I wanted to believe that maybe she would be like a second mom to me, someone who would love me, who would make our family feel complete. But that's not what happened. From the moment she moved in, it was clear Karen didn't want me there. She never said it outright, never told me to leave, but she didn't have to. She showed it in the little things at first, like making dinner plans for just her and my dad, as if I wasn't part of the family, or redecorating the house and taking down pictures of my mom without even asking me. At first, I tried to tell myself that she was just adjusting, that she was trying to make the house feel like her home too. But then she started changing things that had nothing to do with decorating. She started telling my dad that I needed to be more independent, which was just her way of saying that she didn't want me around. Suddenly, I was the one doing all the house chores, the one being left out of conversations, the one who was constantly being made to feel like a guest in my own home. My dad, who had always been there for me, started siding with her more and more. If I spoke up about feeling excluded, he'd say I was being dramatic. If I told him how much I missed how things used to be, he'd tell me I needed to grow up. I kept thinking if I just tried harder, if I stayed out of her way, if I didn't cause problems, maybe things would get better. Maybe Karen would warm up to me, or at the very least, my dad would realize what was happening. But he didn't. He just kept slipping further and further away from me. And Karen? She was winning. By the time I was 17, she had him completely wrapped around her finger. She didn't even have to be subtle anymore. One night, we were sitting at the dinner table, and out of nowhere, she just said it. She's almost an adult. She needs to move out after high school. She can't stay here forever, Mark. And the worst part? My dad nodded. He didn't argue, didn't tell her that I was his daughter, that this was my home. He just agreed. I felt my stomach drop, my whole body go numb. I waited for him to take it back, to say something, anything, that would make me feel like I still belonged there. But he didn't. He just kept eating, as if nothing had happened, as if he hadn't just shattered everything I had left. That was the moment I realized I had lost. Karen had taken everything from me, my home, my security, my dad. She had spent years chipping away at my place in that house, and I had nothing left to hold on to. I knew then that I had no choice. I started preparing to leave, counting down the days until graduation when I would finally be on my own. I thought I was losing everything. But what Karen didn't know was that karma had its own plans for her. Because in just a few short months, everything was about to change. And the woman who spent years trying to push me out, she was the one who would end up with nowhere to go. I spent the next few months walking on eggshells. Every morning, I woke up knowing that I was living on borrowed time, that the place I had once called home wasn't mine anymore. It belonged to her. She had taken everything, my dad, my sense of belonging, my security. I was just waiting for the day when she'd finally get what she wanted, and I'd be gone for good. At first, I kept telling myself it wasn't real. Maybe my dad didn't mean it. Maybe he would change his mind. Maybe, just maybe, he would wake up one morning, look at me, and remember that I was his daughter, that I was the little girl he had once promised to always protect. But he never did. Instead, things only got worse. Karen had won, and she knew it. She no longer had to whisper her manipulations in my dad's ear when she thought I wasn't listening. She didn't need to be subtle anymore. She walked through the house like a queen, like she was the only one who mattered, like I was just some unwanted guest overstaying my welcome. And my dad? He followed her lead. The exclusion became more obvious. I'd walk into the kitchen and see them sitting together, laughing over breakfast, only to realize they had gone out to eat and never even invited me. I'd overhear them making plans for a weekend trip and feel my heart sink when I realized I was never meant to be part of them. "Oh," Karen would say with a fake look of surprise when I walked in on them talking about their plans. "We thought you'd be busy. You should have said something." But we both knew the truth. I was never invited in the first place. The house felt smaller every day, like it was closing in on me, suffocating me. My presence was tolerated at best, ignored at worst. And then, slowly, it became resented. Karen didn't want me there, and she made sure I knew it. She started picking at everything I did. If I left a glass in the sink, she would sigh loudly and complain to my dad about how she was always the one cleaning up after me. If I stayed in my room too much, she'd say I was being rude and isolating myself. If I tried to sit with them in the living room, she'd find an excuse to leave the room, making it painfully clear that my presence was unwanted. She's so ungrateful. I overheard her saying to my dad one night, "She doesn't even appreciate everything we do for her, everything they did for me." That was the moment I realized I wasn't just an inconvenience to her. I was a problem that needed to be solved, and she was going to fix it. It was a slow, calculated attack. At first, it was just little things, comments here and there about how I needed to be more independent, how kids my age should start thinking about their futures. Then it became more direct. One night, we were sitting at the dinner table, the three of us. It was rare for me to even be included in these meals anymore. And looking back, I think it was intentional. Karen wanted an audience for what she was about to say. "She's almost an adult," she said casually, twirling her fork in her pasta like she wasn't about to destroy me. "She needs to move out after high school. She can't stay here forever, Mark." I looked at my dad, begging him with my eyes to say something, to defend me. Instead, he just nodded. "You're right," he said. And just like that, it was decided. I felt the world shift under me, like I had just been sucker punched. My mouth opened, but no words came out. I was frozen. My own father had just agreed to kick me out of my own home. Karen barely even looked at me. She had already moved on, already won. That night, I locked myself in my room and stared at the ceiling for hours. I thought about every moment that had led up to this, every sign I had ignored, every desperate hope I had clung to that things would get better. But they weren't going to get better. I wasn't wanted here. I was just waiting for the day they would hand me my suitcase and tell me to go. After that, I stopped trying. I didn't fight back, didn't argue, didn't beg. I just started preparing for the inevitable. I focused on school, got a part-time job, started saving money. If they wanted me gone, I'd be ready when the time came. But the worst part? Even after everything, even after my dad had chosen her over me, I still loved him. I still hoped that one day he would see what she was doing, that he would realize what he had done. But I didn't know then that everything was about to change. Because karma? It was coming for Karen. The day everything changed started like any other. I woke up feeling the same dull emptiness that had settled in my chest ever since my dad agreed to let Karen push me out. I had stopped hoping for a miracle, stopped wishing for him to wake up and realize what he was doing. I had accepted that this wasn't my home anymore. I was just waiting for the moment I had to walk out the door for good. But fate had other plans. It started with a phone call. I was in my room, finishing up some homework when I heard my dad's voice downstairs. At first, it was normal, calm, steady. Then it changed. His voice tightened, rising in a way I hadn't heard in years. "What do you mean you saw her?" There was a long silence. "When?" Another pause. "Who was she with?" I sat up, my heart pounding in my chest. Something was wrong. My dad was never like this. He never raised his voice, never lost control. But now he sounded like he was barely holding himself together. Then I heard the phone slam onto the table. A chair scraped against the floor. Heavy footsteps, fast, angry. I crept to my door and cracked it open, peering out just in time to see my dad storming toward the front door. Karen was just coming inside, her purse slung over her shoulder, looking as composed and polished as ever. She barely had time to react before my dad was in front of her. "Where were you?" His voice was dangerously low. Karen blinked. "Excuse me?" I said. "Where the hell were you?" She scoffed. "I was out with a friend." "What's with the interrogation?" My dad took a step closer, his fists clenched at his sides. "Who is he, Karen?" Karen's face twisted. For a moment, she almost looked nervous, but then, like always, she recovered. She tilted her head, letting out a short laugh. "I have no idea what you're talking about." But my dad wasn't laughing. "You were seen at a restaurant with another man." His voice cracked on the last word. "You were holding his hand, kissing him." Karen's face paled. Just for a second, just long enough for me to see the mask slip. Then she crossed her arms and rolled her eyes. "Oh, for God's sake, Mark, you're being ridiculous." But my dad wasn't letting this go. "Not this time." "Who is he?" His voice was raw, broken. Karen sighed dramatically, shaking her head. "You're acting like a crazy person. Maybe if you weren't always so stressed, so busy running after your ungrateful daughter, you'd actually have time for me." And just like that, the conversation shifted. She had done it again, turned it around, deflected, made it someone else's fault. Made it my fault. For so long, my dad had fallen for it. For so long, he had let her manipulate him, let her twist everything until she was always the victim. And for a second, I saw the hesitation in his eyes. The doubt. "No, not this time." I stepped forward before I even realized what I was doing. My hands were shaking, my heart racing, but I didn't care. "That's not going to work this time, Karen." She turned to me, her expression hardening. "Excuse me?" I swallowed the lump in my throat and forced myself to stand taller. "You heard me. You're not going to twist this around and make it about me. You're not going to make him feel guilty for your lies." Her eyes narrowed. "You don't know what you're talking about, little girl." "I do." I shot back. "I know exactly what you've been doing. I've known for years. And I let it happen. I'll let you push me out. I'll let you turn my dad against me. But you know what? I don't care anymore." My dad turned to me, his face unreadable. I could see the conflict in his eyes. The war between the man who loved me and the man who had let her take everything from me. For the first time in years, I saw him thinking, really thinking. I took a deep breath. "She spent years making you believe I was the problem. She made you think that I didn't belong here, that I was the one who needed to leave." I looked Karen dead in the eyes. But it was never me. It was her. Karen let out a sharp laugh. "Oh, please. You're just a bitter little brat who can't handle change. You've always been jealous that your dad finally had someone else in his life. But this time, my dad didn't agree. He didn't nod along. He didn't take her side. He was staring at her like he was really seeing her for the first time. And then finally he spoke. "Get out." Karen blinked. "What?" My dad's voice was calm. Too calm. "Pack your things and get out." For the first time, she panicked. "Mark, don't be stupid. You're just upset." No, his voice was firmer this time. "I should have done this a long time ago. I'll let you turn me against my own daughter. I'll let you control this house, this family. But it's over. I'm done." Karen's eyes darted to me, filled with rage. She opened her mouth, but I cut her off. "Looks like you got what you wanted," I said softly. "I'm staying. And you? You're leaving." She had spent years trying to erase me, trying to push me out. In the end, she was the one who had nowhere to go. She stormed upstairs, slamming the door to their bedroom. I heard drawers yanked open, suitcases being pulled from the closet. She was moving fast, trying to take control one last time, but it was useless. She was done. An hour later, she was gone. Just like that. I stood in the living room, staring at the front door, still trying to believe it was real. I had spent so long waiting to leave, preparing for the day I would have to pack my own bags and walk away. But in the end, I hadn't been the one to go. Karen was. And for the first time in a long, long time, this house felt like home again. The silence after Karen left was almost deafening. For years, I had dreamed of this moment. The day she would finally be gone, the day I wouldn't have to walk on eggshells in my own home. And yet, as I stood in the middle of the living room, staring at the closed front door, I felt nothing. No relief, no joy, no satisfaction, just emptiness. I had spent so long preparing myself to leave, convincing myself that I didn't belong here, that I would never be welcome in this house again. But now that she was gone, now that I was the one who got to stay, I wasn't sure what came next. Then, I heard my dad sigh behind me. It wasn't the usual sigh of frustration or dismissal, the one I had grown so used to over the years. It was different. It was heavier. When I turned around, he was standing there, shoulders slumped, looking at the floor like he couldn't even face me. And for the first time in a long time, he looked lost. I didn't say anything. I just waited. Finally, he looked up at me, and the moment our eyes met, I saw something I hadn't seen in years: regret. I messed up, didn't I? His voice was hoarse, like he had swallowed something too painful to admit out loud. I could have let him sit in his guilt. I could have told him, yes, you did. You abandoned me. You let her turn you against me. You made me feel like I wasn't your daughter anymore. But I didn't, because deep down, I knew that nothing I said would hurt him more than the truth he had just realized on his own. Instead, I just nodded. Yeah, Dad, you did. He ran a hand through his hair and let out a shaky breath. I don't even know how I let it happen. I thought. He stopped himself, shaking his head. No, that's a lie. I do know how. I let her get into my head. I let her make me believe that you were the problem, that you were in the way of my happiness. But it wasn't you, Lily. It was never you. A lump formed in my throat, but I swallowed it down. Then why did you let her do it? He flinched like I had slapped him. Because I was weak. He exhaled, his voice breaking. Because I was lonely. And I let myself believe that if I made her happy, then I'd finally be happy too. But the truth is, I was miserable. And the worst part is, I let you suffer for it. For so long, I had begged for this. For him to acknowledge what he had done. For him to admit that he had hurt me. But now that it was happening, I didn't know what to do with it. The anger that had fueled me for years was still there. But underneath, it was something else. Something raw. Something vulnerable. Something that still wanted my dad. I turned away, my arms wrapping around myself like a shield. You were supposed to protect me. I know, he whispered. And I failed. The words hung between us like a heavy weight neither of us knew how to lift. Then, after a long pause, he spoke again. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even deserve it. But, Lily, if there's any part of you that still wants me to be your dad, I want to try. I want to fix this. I don't know how, but I want to try. I closed my eyes. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe that he could fix the damage he had done, that we could go back to the way things were before Karen ever entered our lives. But we couldn't. Too much had happened. Too much had been lost. And yet, I turned back to him, my voice quiet but firm. It's going to take time. Relief flooded his face, but he didn't push it. He just nodded. I know. That night, for the first time in years, we ate dinner together, just the two of us. There were no forced conversations, no tension hanging in the air. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't even close, but it was a start. And as for Karen, she tried to come back. Of course she did. A week after she left, she showed up at our front door, makeup perfect, voice soft and sweet, like she hadn't spent years making my life hell. Mark, I made a mistake, she said, placing a delicate hand on his arm. I let my emotions get the best of me. But you know I love you. We can work through this. I held my breath, waiting. For years, I had watched my dad fall for her lies, for her manipulations. I had seen him choose her over me time and time again. But this time, he didn't hesitate. He stepped back, shook his head. No, Karen, we're done. Her smile faltered. Mark, don't be ridiculous. You need me. He exhaled slowly. No, I don't. And just like that, the door shut in her face. I watched through the window as she stood there for a moment, stunned, before turning and walking away. For the first time, Karen was alone, the same way she had wanted me to be. I should have felt victorious. I should have felt triumphant, like justice had finally been served. But all I felt was peace. Because I didn't need revenge. I didn't need to see her suffer. She had already destroyed herself. And I had finally gotten my home back. I looked over at my dad, standing in the doorway, his shoulders a little straighter, his eyes a little clearer. It was going to take time, but maybe, just maybe, we would be okay. And if there was one thing I had learned through all of this, it was this. Sometimes karma does the work for you. For years, I thought the only way to survive was to fight. I believed that if I just pushed back harder, if I just proved myself enough, I could win my place in my own home. But the truth is, sometimes the best thing you can do is step back and let karma do the work. I spent so much time carrying the weight of anger, resentment, and loss, thinking that one day I'd get the chance to make Karen suffer the way she made me suffer. But in the end, she was the architect of her own downfall. I didn't have to expose her. I didn't have to scream or demand justice. She did it to herself. And the moment my dad finally saw her for who she really was, everything she had built, the lies, the manipulation, the control, came crashing down around her. And I was still standing. I know I'm not the only one who's been through something like this. I know there are so many people out there who have been pushed aside, ignored, made to feel like they didn't belong in their own home. Maybe you've had a step-parent like Karen, someone who saw you as an inconvenience instead of family. Maybe it was a relative, a sibling, even a parent, someone who made you feel like you were always one step away from being abandoned. So tell me, have you ever had a toxic family member try to push you out? What did you do? Did you fight to stay? Did you leave? Did you, like me, have to watch someone you love turn into a stranger before your eyes? Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that family isn't about blood. It's about who chooses you. For so long, I thought I had to earn my dad's love back. But love isn't something you should have to fight for. And when I stopped fighting, when I let go of the anger and just let things unfold, I realized something important. The people who truly care about you will always find their way back. It took time, and it wasn't easy. I don't know if my dad and I will ever go back to the way things were before Karen. But what I do know is that we are trying. And for now, that's enough. So if you're watching this and you feel like you're losing your place in your own home, if you feel like someone is pushing you out, if you feel like you're constantly fighting to be seen, just know this. You don't have to prove your worth to anyone. You don't have to beg someone to love you, to accept you, to choose you. Real family doesn't need convincing. And sometimes, the best revenge? It isn't fighting back. It's watching them destroy themselves. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to AGS Stories for more powerful and emotional real-life tales. Have you ever faced betrayal from someone who was supposed to be family? How did you handle it? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear your stories. And remember, sometimes the best revenge isn't fighting back. It's letting karma do the work. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.